Thank you, Cheryl. Guys, it's always a privilege and a blessing to have you here. You're welcome all the time. It was back in the days when there were no smartphones or even cell phones, and we had a party line. But the party line's a different story. One of my I see some chuckles. I hear some chuckles about party line, yes. One of my grandfather's hobbies was listening to and talking on his shortwave radio. He was what they called a ham operator, hearing stuff from all around the world and chatting over the air. On the side of his house, near the edge of the carport, that's what they called covered, paved, open space where they park cars, was the antenna tower, which is about 20 feet high or so, high enough to where it could pick up waves without interference. He would talk with people as far away as Argentina and Brazil who had shortwave radios. But when voice wasn't possible, he would use Morse code, the old dot and dash system. In World War II, he was one of the first in his area to get news about the war from places like Switzerland and Italy before reporters were able to report back from their radio stations. He made a habit of listening to what was going on beyond his immediate situation, having his ears on, as they said, while he did other things around the workshop. As a child, I got to work with that radio. I had to learn to listen to trucker lingo and respond to them in their language. We all listen to each other in varying degrees according to who or what we are listening to. Would you say you are a good listener? Or on the flip side, when have you felt listened to? When have you rested knowing the story you want to convey to others has been heard? Matthew was home for the holiday, so I asked him if he remembered an experience where he wasn't listened to. He told this story. When he was 5 or 6, our family was eating at Chevy's restaurant, where the servers make the drinks and they bring them to your table. Matthew ordered a sippy cup of milk. He had done that every time we went there. Our server brought the kids' cup with the top on it and that little bendy straw, and Matthew took a sip. It was lumpy and thick. He told his mom. Vicky tasted it. It was pina colada mix. So then, having told a story with Mom in it, I thought I could ask Matthew, was there a time when you felt I didn't listen to you? Immediately, Matthew said, and I quote, kindergarten through high school. That didn't include preschool and college. That's good. Rachel Naomi Remen says, listening is the oldest and perhaps the most powerful tool of healing. It is often through the quality of our listening and not the wisdom of our words that we are able to affect the most profound changes in the people around us. When we listen, we offer with our attention an opportunity for wholeness. Our listening creates a sanctuary for the homeless parts within the other person, that which has been denied, unloved, devalued by themselves and by others, that which is hidden. Years ago, one of our family's adopted college students spent a summer doing mission work in Paraguay. In the fall, after he returned, he and I met twice about his trip for hours. My journal from that time says, I found myself completely wrapped in his stories. He experienced so much of the people there. He shared pictures, memories, thoughts, and feelings from his travel journal. Life in a poor, rural, and tranquil area, living in a farmhouse, milking a cow, orange trees, cotton, his latrine, the tranquil Paraguayan lifestyle. I received a letter from him. It was a time before screens, about a week after we met. He wrote, Dear Mark, Thank you very much for taking your time to hear and to understand what happened to me this summer in Paraguay. Although my mother listened to me recite some passages from my journals, you are the first person who has really tried to understand why I was there and what I learned. You are the only one who has taken time to look at my experience, to analyze it, and to understand why I was there and what I learned, and to understand also how important it was for me. Through sharing my journey with you, even I better understood why I went to a third world country and how that experience has changed my life forever. The most important one, answered Jesus, is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. It seems to me that loving our neighbors begins with listening to them. It should be a reflection of how God listens to us, out of God's love for us. It communicates and shows our love. If we fail to listen to each other, most likely we may be failing to listen to God. To listen to someone is to say they are as important as we are. To listen to someone is to move from being preoccupied with ourselves, our thoughts, our feelings, our own agendas, to being occupied with something outside ourselves. Listening to someone's story grants them a space in which to reveal the aspects of themselves they deem important, events that have shaped their lives, people who have influenced the way they live, tragedies they are enduring, joys they are receiving, all the things that are a part of a person's makeup. We love for the special things in our lives to be heard. Don't we tell some of the same experience we have had, the same stories in our lives, over and over? Can you recall a time when you said, I may have told you this story, but I'm going to tell you again? Smiles, I see. Raise those hands, there we go. Listening takes effort. We can easily hear what someone says, but to listen to words, observe body language, hear tone inflections, put together all these things to understand what the person is trying to convey takes concentration and energy. Stephen Covey, the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, writes, to truly listen means to transcend your own autobiography, to get out of your frame of reference, out of your own value system, out of your own history and judging tendencies, and to get deeply into the frame of reference or viewpoint of another person. You're listening to understand. You're focused on receiving the deep communication of another human soul. The more deeply you understand other people, he says, the more you will appreciate them, the more reverent you will feel about them. That's why the listening sessions we had online June 28th and the in-person listening session today after worship is so vital. As is printed in the bulletin, storytelling is essential to revealing who we are and how we make meaning of life. We need to hear each other's stories of our coming to University Baptist, our stories of Pastor John, what we miss because he is absent, how we feel about all that, and the concerns and dreams we have about the future. Listening is also being present and attentive to someone else. We become in tune with all that is coming from the other person. Jesus found this to be so vital, that he withdrew to quiet places to pray to God. He knew the Hebrew scriptures so well. He had to know the story of Samuel and Eli I read a while ago, waiting and abiding in awe-filled attention, waiting for God to speak and like Samuel saying to God, "Speak, for your servant is listening." We often focus so much on the active part of Jesus' ministry that we forget this deliberate withdrawal to listen to God. Jesus is our model. Jesus is the great listener. He listens deeply to God, and then, in addition to all, Jesus brings back into his ministry that same way of listening to the woman who touched the hem of his garment tell her story, the whole truth about her life. Listening to one of Israel's teachers, Nicodemus, ask, "How can this be?" when Jesus talks about being born again, being born of the Spirit. Listening beyond verbal words. Listening to the hunger of the crowds for his words, listening to the cries of the lepers, the lame, the blind, the mentally disturbed, listening to the emotions of the disciples on the road to Emmaus after the resurrection. Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Vietnamese Buddhist monk, said, "I am listening to this person with only one purpose, to give this person a chance to suffer less." The woman who touched the hem of Jesus' garment was first physically healed. Then her suffering was lessened by Jesus and all those around her, hearing her story. About a year before the pandemic, I went with a group to a retreat center in Pennsylvania where the theme of the retreat was centered around the formation of the Christian heart. The retreat center was run by an order of nuns, and on the last night of the retreat, our group took 2 of the nuns to dinner at a local Chinese restaurant, and we sat around a huge round table. While we were waiting for our food to arrive, we shared stories about ourselves, and then the retreat leader asked the 2 nuns if they would share something about themselves. The first sister talked about hearing a voice when she was 7 years old and the influence that had on the rest of her life. The second sister, a very young woman, then told this story. Growing up, she was not religious at all. In fact, she had never heard of God. One day in high school, she heard a voice and had an overwhelming urge to leave the school to not go to the library where she went every day. She persuaded her friend to leave with her to go to a restaurant to study for a test they had that afternoon. Leaving the school in her car, she looked back to see hundreds of students running from the school. Sister then leaned into our table and asked, "Have you ever heard of Columbine High School?" If you're not aware of Columbine High School, it is a school in Colorado where in 1999 a mass shooting occurred with 10 people being killed in the library. I was changed by listening to her story. She was changed herself by being able to tell us her story. There are many tools of listening. Having a clean screen in your mind without all those preconceptions of a person we are listening to, the discipline of attention and focused effort, patience, intentionality, the gift of our time, openness to what's being said and remains unsaid, compassion, forgiveness, and the occasional perceptive question. But for me, the greatest of all tools of listening is presence. Just being present in the moment with another person provides a welcoming space for them to look more deeply and compassionately into themselves and share a part of their journey that is so powerfully a part of their story. Does not our presence become God's presence? Not that we are a perfect incarnation of the Word of God, but we are a witness and a testimony as Christ dwells in us. In the story of the woman healed from her hemorrhaging of 12 years, Jesus' healing and presence helps her access something deep down inside her, the truth. So she expresses the whole truth to everyone who gathered around her. She heard herself speak her own truth too, her story. And that's why our listening presence is so important. We and they are changed, transformed by deeper connections through the sharing of our stories and the listening to their stories. The crowd around the woman who spoke the whole truth was changed. The people around the Chinese restaurant, around the table, they were changed. Sister was changed. The young student who went to Paraguay was changed, and so was I. For the close of the sermon today, I asked Reese, a young African-American man I've had the privilege of listening to compose a poem that expresses what being listened to means to him. Here are his words. Volumes can expand, tones can demand, but when the rushing waves die down, what's revealed in the sand? When you learn to feel the waves instead of just listening to them, you will better understand what's going on in the water. When you understand what's going on in the water, you can then listen to the waves instead of feel them. To be listened to is to be covered in a feeling of elephant ears wrapped around you. Understood with compassion. Taken in without attachment. Getting the message through the fog makes a hungry heart feel astounded. Hopefully, our ears become God's ears, for the world needs our love by listening to each other as God listens. Amen.